Light a campfire, and everyone's a storyteller. Join us for some thought-provoking and beyond fireside chats.
Hello and welcome to Leave Our World a Better Place. My name is Kasha and today I'm chatting to Murray Weakley, Regional Executive Chef for Beyond Botswana. Murray trained at the Institute of Culinary Arts in Stellenbosch, South Africa, where he developed the ability to combine classical French techniques with local food cultures, creating playful twists on traditional dishes and ingredients. He believes that every meal should be a celebration of sustainable, locally inspired, wholesome food. Murray will be telling us about Beyond's food philosophy, including an increasing move towards lighter plant-based menus. He will also describe how Beyond lodges source their food supplies and cater for special dietary requests, such as a vegan or vegetarian diet. Murray, thank you so much for coming to chat to us.
Cheers, yeah, thanks.
We all know that at Beyond we absolutely love feeding people, and food is a really big focus. But I don't think that many of our guests know that there's actually quite a well-defined philosophy behind the kind of cooking that we do. Could you describe some of the thinking behind the kind of food that's served at Beyond lodges in general and the lodges in Botswana where you are based in particular?
Yeah, for sure. Here with Beyond, the food ethos that we try and portray is, our food is a celebration of regionally inspired, sustainable, wholesome food. That's the ethos that throughout our lodges we always try and sort of aim for. Obviously, each lodge has its own particular identity when it comes to food, but the whole idea behind the food here in Botswana is that every meal, whether it's a set meal, a bush experience, snacks on game drive, or even just your canapes at the bar, every meal should be an experience. It should be that wow moment. There's been a huge shift in our thinking when it comes to food. Before, food was pretty much the standard meat, starch, 3 veg and sauce, which worked for a time, but to be honest, I feel very, very outdated. So we have a huge shift towards sort of lighter, fresher, with the typical Beyond over-the-top approach, if you can say it like that. On safari, food really does play a big role, as can be seen by the amount of opportunities to eat in your average day at Beyond. And I think at times that this can get a little too much, so hence the need to box clever in our menu planning. We try and avoid sort of the heavy meal after meal after meal. And like I say, it's there's been a huge shift in the way we look at it here in Botswana.
Absolutely. So it's a food philosophy that's kind of constantly evolving and changing and keeping up with trends and with what's going on around the world.
Yes, yeah, I'd say so. That has been our main focus is how can we keep up with the international trends, but without losing that safari feel to it. So it's a bit of a balance that we've had to walk there.
You mentioned that each of the lodges has got their own sort of particular character and food identity. Can you talk a little bit about those and describe those identities and how they were determined?
Yeah, no, for sure, of course. So, I mean, obviously, throughout the lodges here in Botswana, we like to keep the same standard, the golden thread, as we call it. But obviously, each lodge itself, from the decor to the style of the lodge, everything like that is very different. Hence the need for the lodges themselves to have their own food identity. So if you look at Mbeka Tented Camp, so our food philosophy there is something we call African bistro. The whole feel of the dining area, whether it's a table in the sun on the main deck or whether you're being served poolside, it's a very, very relaxed and sort of laid-back affair. Casual is probably the word that would best describe it. Big trays of casual dining designed to be shared family style, just good food done well. Then at Tirana, our food identity is what we call playful simplicity. So here we look for sort of fun twists and flavor combinations, different playful elements to lighten and to brighten the meals. This lodge is definitely the place to eat if you're looking for sort of fresh, light meals. If you have ever sat on the deck here at Tirana, it definitely has that sort of Sunday afternoon feeling to it. It's not one of the places you come just to eat. You come here to linger. You sit in the sun, look out over the water, you just relax. It's one of those places that screams for a glass of sort of crisp white wine. So it's a lot more fun. Then Sandibe, our food identity here is earthy, refined, and deconstructed. So the chefs at Sandibe really get put through their paces here. It is a fantastic team we have, and they truly deliver a dining experience. Sort of here we're looking at sort of a more elevated style of food. You look at, so, for example, 4 different options of eggs Benedicts on offer at breakfast, elegant lunches, lighter, more refined high teas, and then dinner really is just an experience. I would say, without sort of bragging, it was really on par with some of the top restaurants around, but, yet still echoing our surroundings.
It's kind of true to the setting, and it's also true to the character of the lodge itself at each place.
Exactly. As I say, like, even though the food is an experience and your dining should be an experience, I really feel it shouldn't be at the forefront. It should be something that just seamlessly happens. And, you do get those wow moments, but you're not overwhelmed by it.
Absolutely. Makes sense. As regional executive chef for Botswana, I know that you work a lot with the food identity, with the menu at the lodges. Can you talk a little bit about the kind of functions that you fulfill at the lodges in terms of setting menus, testing, training the lodge chefs and the kitchen teams, just in general, your role?
So, yeah, obviously I do quite a bit of traveling. I sort of bounce between the lodges, setting menus, sort of coming up with concepts that we need to implement. Obviously now with COVID going, all the new protocols that the kitchen has to be running. So it's basically that sort of stuff that I do on my day-to-day. Yet I still very much work on the line with the chefs. That's why I became a chef in the beginning. I've tried to stick to that. Sort of my main focus is actually spending time with the chefs in the kitchen. Obviously training happens on a day-to-day basis. For me, working in a foreign country, being South African myself, I really do feel the need to give back. And this is done through the training and the upskilling of the chefs that I work with. Training is probably one of the biggest parts of my position at the moment. But, obviously there's a lot of formal training that happens, like I said, with new menus and concepts being introduced. But it really is so much more than that. Literally, it's day to day whilst working online. And this really is evident with the chefs that we have at the moment. They really have, I've been here sort of 4 years. Over the last 4 years, the chefs have grown leaps and bounds. To talk a little bit about the training, over the past year when the lodges were closed now, we ran a training program where every single chef in Beyond Botswana came to Sandibe, and we did a pretty intensive 6-week training course. So I got 4 or 5 chefs in at a time, and we just rotated through. 6 weeks, each of them were there. We focused on hard skills, but I really try to make the course a little bit deeper. Not just how to make X or Y, but why are we doing it? How does food react to certain things? Like I said, I try to get it deeper and get the chefs to have a deeper understanding of why they're doing things and how food works at that sort of level, more than just, this is a recipe, can you execute it? We also have the Star in Training program, which we run, whereby we take candidates from the communities around the concessions and we get them into our lodges to do an internship. And the goal here is to give candidates some job experience and as well as to expose them to the industry. Out of the 8 candidates we've had in the kitchen, 6 of them have actually found permanent employment with Beyond. And I think we're all extremely proud of that. Yeah.
And just in terms of the chefs that you do work with, they're local Botswana chefs. What kind of backgrounds do they come from? Do they have a lot of formal training, or is it something that they've picked up on the job mainly?
All my chefs are local Botswana, but very few of them have extensive formal training. I think most of them have done sort of a 6-month tertiary course, certificate level course, if you'll call it that. But very little of them have actual formal training or things like that. So it has been on the job training.
All right, getting back to the topic of the food itself. You mentioned earlier that you always try to keep up with trends and try to look at sustainable options and lighter options as well. And that's something that we've seen increasingly come across as a global trend, is the whole idea of meat-free cooking. Obviously, people are thinking both of the health benefits and sustainability and the environmental impact of the meat industry. So, and that kind of plays, I think, into 2 topics that are kind of relevant in your world. First of all, it's handling dietary requirements such as vegetarian or vegan guests, and also just in general implementing the trend. Maybe just to start off with special requirements and dietary requirements that people have, I think there is still a perception, as you said, safari was very much sort of associated with that heavy, very sort of meat-heavy, meat-inspired cooking. Have you been seeing more requests for vegan or vegetarian diets coming through, and how do you cater for them?
So we definitely have seen an increase in vegan, vegetarian, whether it be wheat-free, whether it be dairy-free. Just as dietary requirements in general, we really have seen a big increase in it. And how we go about it, all our menus, we always have those options available. And how I've designed the menus is that when we do have, say, a vegan coming into camp, we always have a few different options for them on the menu. So what we'll do is I would have alternatives. So I'd set out a menu as it is for just your normal, whether it be a red meat, a white meat, or your normal vegetarian dish. But I've set up alternatives that if we do have a vegan in camp, those dishes can be altered and tweaked in such a way that then a vegan guest would have all three options. It's more than just taking off the meat. So we'd take off the meat and replace it with something else, and then we would adjust the sides that go with it to complement the main element on that plate. But yeah, dietary requirements and preferences and particularly allergies are really a big focus for us at the lodge. We like to offer the guests a full dining experience, no matter what their particular restrictions are. Mm-hmm. Like I say, we've designed the menus in such a way that it works no matter what restrictions you have. But like you said, with the assumption of sort of meat-heavy dishes, I think to date, most safari lodges you visit, the assumption of heavy meat-based cuisine is still pretty accurate. And I don't really understand why. With the world of food being an ever-changing thing, I don't understand why some lodges are still stuck in the old style. And Beyond lodges here in Botswana, with the move to lighten and brighten our food, we've moved away from this, and it really is reducing the amount of meat being served without leaving the most diehard carnivores wanting. The vast majority of our guests are coming from countries that are at the forefront of this food movement. So why would we choose to stay in the past? We really have stepped up our offering and kept up with the current trends, and just generally the need to produce a more sustainable cuisine. What I have found quite interesting is, although we have gotten a lot more sort of vegetarians, vegans coming through, I've noticed a huge increase in the amount of sort of your meat-eating guests, if you can call it that, that are opting to go vegetarian or vegan meals. Obviously not for the entire stay, but maybe once a day they would have a vegetarian dish. There's been a big increase in that. So obviously we've had to adjust and box clever when it comes to that.
Absolutely. And how do you go about creating a meal like that? Coming up with a plant-based dish or a plant-based menu that would also appeal to meat eaters. What are some of the changes that you make, and how do you start thinking about it?
I think the trick when it comes to this is to not make it sound like a vegetarian dish. Like you almost want to, and I'm talking about particularly getting your meat eaters interested, is I found comfort food. Sort of think your white bean and herb paella or Cape Malay style vegetable curries, your lentil boboties, your mushroom risottos, things like that. So I found introducing those, I'm getting a lot more meat eaters interested in vegetarian food.
And it really sounds like a complete meal in itself. It's not like they're kind of missing that meat option out of it.
No, not at all. We've designed it where we're putting in enough umami flavor into the food that actually satiates the meat craving that most people are getting.
Well, obviously there are a couple of elements that you have to think about in terms of coming up with those plant-based alternatives. That umami flavor is something that you spoke about, but it's also, texture and of course nutritional value, which is I'm sure something that you look at as well. How do you balance that? And, what are some of the alternatives that you use? Instead of meat, eggs or dairy, how do you introduce alternatives to that cater for all of those elements?
I think our main focus when coming up with dishes that work like that is it still a balanced diet? Is it still a balanced meal? We have to try and find ways to introduce enough protein into the meal, still having the right amount of fats in the meal. One thing I found that helps hugely with this is the introduction of different grains and different nuts, seeds, pulses, things like aquafaba, trying to get pectin out of apples, trying to find alternatives that are naturally occurring in food. I've seen so many of these meat substitutions, and really, I don't think that's the way. I think there's a place for it. I just don't think that's the way that I want the food to go. I think food naturally has everything that we need. I don't think we need to disguise it to be something else.
I think I get the concept that you're going for. And I see that people are coming up with things like, meat-free chicken or meat-free fish that's made up of a whole bunch of other elements. But I think what you're trying to say is work with those ingredients themselves and not try and masquerade and make them pretend to be something that they're not.
Exactly.
Some of the ingredients in sort of plant-based cooking are quite specific. And I know that in Botswana, you're working with very, very remote lodges. What are the challenges of actually getting hold of those ingredients? Do you find that you struggle with that to get them into the Delta?
Yeah, no, to be honest, it is incredibly difficult. There are not a lot of these alternatives which are available to us here. Obviously, we need to order a good few weeks in advance. We try and always keep enough stock what we need at the lodges. But as I said, knowing about these dietaries in advance always helps. The problem we are facing at the moment with all the current circumstances, what's going on around the world, our suppliers are not holding a huge amount of stock. So it can always be quite difficult to get these if we don't have much notice.
I can just imagine. Well, obviously, talking about plant-based in general, you're doing more of it already. But if you have guests with very specific requirements, it's really crucial to know quite a bit ahead of time.
Yeah, it does help us. It helps us with our planning and that. So it also just helps us train the teams up, especially if it is something that is completely from left field. So I know we're talking about meat-free now, but I'm going to use an example about celiac disease. If I know guests are arriving that have celiac disease, we can make sure that the kitchen is sterilized in the way that needs to be sterilized, that sections of the kitchen are cordoned off to be able to cater safely for these dietaries. You would be amazed at how many times it's happened where we have found out literally on arrival. And then obviously there's a mad scramble to get everything ready. But yeah, so obviously the more time we have, the easier it is to do it properly.
Yeah, absolutely. That is something that you guys do as well. You always have the chef connect with the guests. If not on arrival, then prior to meals to discuss sort of preferences, meal elements, all of that. Is that right?
100%. On arrival, when the managers meet you at the camp, they generally just double check any dietary requirements. I always encourage them to ask the question, are there any foods you don't particularly like? Because a lot of people, they say might have a nut allergy, which we know about, but they absolutely hate tomatoes. And then very often we only find this out too late. So I do encourage that talk right from the first, second guests arrive. And then I encourage my chefs to go out at the first meal and to introduce themselves. Having that connection with the chef, yeah. I find guests are a lot easier to give feedback. They can let you know if they want anything different. They can let you know if they want something off menu if need be. But I find without that connection between the chef and the guest, some people aren't so forthcoming.
That human relationship is always so important. And I think that's true for just about everything that Beyond does. But I think food in particular, because it's such a comfort thing, really.
Yeah, very much so.
So in terms of the ingredients that you sort of look at, especially plant-based, meat-free alternatives, is there anything that you're actually able to grow yourself on site or to source or create? Like, for example, just now you were talking about getting pectin out of apples. Is there stuff that you can get other ingredients in and sort of use it to create something that you use in your meat-free menus, or can you grow it yourself? Or is it just too challenging being where you are and being so remote?
Yeah, I think when it comes to being able to grow it ourselves, unfortunately, we're actually not allowed to, by law, to grow anything in our lodges. With the Okavango Delta being a World Heritage Site and being a protected area, we can't have any foreign plants growing. I agree with this completely. As a conservation company, the last thing we want to do is to be part of spreading an invasive species into a place like this. Yeah. So unfortunately, we cannot grow anything ourselves. But like I say, when it comes to vegetarian and to vegan meals, we generally try and make it all ourselves here instead of buying
Absolutely.
your substitutions in or your substitutes in. I really believe when it comes to food, fresh is best. If I can make a dish, whatever it may be, using fresh ingredients rather than using a substitution which has been processed, I think that is definitely the way to go.
Now, it must get really, really challenging for the chefs or for you as well, just to plan around getting ingredients, because not only do you have to think, okay, what's fresh, what's in season, what's happening right now, but, you're also thinking about sustainability. And then when it comes to, health or plant-based foods, then you have to think about, is it organic? Is it genetically modified? Have pesticides been used on it? How complicated does all of this actually make ordering in your food?
Yeah, this is a tricky one for us. As mentioned earlier, it's incredibly difficult to source food out here. We obviously try our best to source organic and non-GMO, but unfortunately, it's not always possible. A little example of what we've done is in Mount, so our biggest town, closest town to where we are. We've actually set up a few little vegetable gardens, and there we're doing sort of organic, no pesticides, things like that. We're harvesting as much as we can, but obviously when we're running a full lodge, it sometimes is not enough to cover the whole lodge. So we definitely do try, but like I said, not always possible.
Yeah. So it's about supporting local and about keeping it as simple as possible whenever you can, though.
100%. Yeah.
Now, we've spoken a little bit about most of your chefs being local Botswana. For many people, especially guests that come to lodges like Beyond, part of the joy of travel is really immersing themselves in that local culture and tasting local cuisines and local specialties. How have you managed to incorporate African-inspired ingredients into the lodge menus? And are there any particular African ingredients that particularly lend themselves to the meat-free movement?
Yeah, first, just want to quickly look at how we can get the local cuisine into our menus. And this can be a little bit tricky. We really do need to find a balance here. I find that the local food in Botswana can be very, very starch heavy, which is obviously what we are trying to avoid, especially sort of at dinner times. So we've had to try and find a way to still showcase the local cuisine and culture whilst keeping up with the trends. Hence part of our food ethos being locally inspired. And this actually plays right into our strengths. We use our westernized techniques when it comes to designing our menus. So we use those techniques in our food preparation, but by using the local ingredients and regional dishes. So we try and incorporate these into our more refined menus by adding elements sort of like our traditional morogo or shebo or chakalaka on a dish, but then by executing it in a more westernized way, if that makes sense. And we also try and serve, especially for those that do eat meat, things like the local fish, the Okavango bream that we serve. Botswana beef is fantastic. It really is a great product. So we try and incorporate the local ingredients into a more westernized approach to food.
And do you often have guests who will come to your chefs and say, listen, we really want to try something that's absolutely, 100% local and that sort of embodies the cuisine of the region?
Yeah, very, very often. And then what we very often then do is we actually invite the guests to come and cook with us and then basically show them how the traditional food is prepared. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. I just wanted to touch on to the whole concept of boma dining a little bit, that outdoor sort of barbecue, or as the South Africans would call it, braai concept. Do you think that there's an extent to which that sort of that idea and that concept is actually responsible for keeping a lot of safari lodge menus very, very meat-based? And how do you get around that? How do you create dishes that are more plant-based and that still satisfy that kind of approach, that mood?
Yeah, so when it comes to our boma evenings at our lodges, once again, a lot of work has been done around the concept. I think there really is just something special about, dining under the stars, sitting around a fire. However, I feel that wherever you go, the boma evening is exactly the same. It's one of those, if you've had one, you've had them all. So we really have tried to reinvent the concept. At Sandibe, we offer a plated boma. So everything is still cooked on the open fire in front of the guests, bit of theatre behind it, still highlighting the local cuisine, but once again, putting some skill and finesse into it. We always have 2 or 3 meat options and then 2 or 3 vegetarian or vegan options. And then it is a slightly more refined evening, but still done in a very, very traditional way. We've always had a lot of vegan offerings to Birmingham, but I'm now just taking it one step further. And an example at Sandibe is possibly the fire-roasted butternut, which is served with, say, your grilled pap, spicy chakalaka, smoked butter beans, and a herb and inkumazi emulsion. Sort of one of the vegetarian dishes that we have there, just as an example. Then
that sounds amazing.
Then at Ngobega, what we've done there, once again, like we mentioned earlier about each lodge having their own identity. Ngobega, the boma evening there has more of a steakhouse feel, if I can call it that, where the guests have an option of what they want their main element to be. So whether it be your grilled beef sirloin, or your roasted peri-peri chicken, or your dukkha spiced cauliflower steak, which has been roasted on the coals. So that's what the guests get as their main option. And then to the table, a big platter comes with all the more traditional vegetarian and vegan sides, which is then served sort of family style. So it really does cater to both meat eaters and non-meat eaters as well. And then the third one being Karana, this sticks to their theme. So the boma evening here is done more in a tapas style. So think small plates of different sharing dishes, all highlighting, like I said, that local cuisine and culture. Once again, vegan and vegetarian dishes here really take the spotlight. If you are not vegetarian or vegan, don't think that that's all you're going to get. You will still get your grilled kudu loin or your local Okavango bream. What we try and do is we try and balance it out so that no matter what your restrictions or your dietary preferences are, you still have that wow moment, that experience that we were talking about.
So basically it's about offering plenty of options and making sure that all of them are just as amazing as possible.
Exactly. Yeah.
You mentioned that food is also constantly evolving and changing. How often do you redesign menus in Botswana to keep up with the most current trends and with what's happening around the world?
I like to change the menus sort of every 3 to 4 months. Well, I like to change it with the seasons. Obviously, there are some dishes which stay on the menu for longer than that, and there are some dishes which get changed or tweaked before that. The menus we run are really, they are ever changing. They're always evolving. We're always looking to improve on what we are serving on a day-to-day basis. But I also like to change things up just to keep the chefs interested and to keep the learning process alive. Each time we introduce a new menu, I like to sort of up the skill level required to execute the dish slightly. Basically, just trying to push the chefs to keep growing, introducing new techniques, things like that.
Now, just to end off with, do you have a personal favorite dish that you can talk about, or maybe even just a favorite dining experience overall?
Yeah, of course. So one thing that we have done, so before I actually mention the dish, just to give you a bit of background, one thing that we actually have introduced here at our lodges in Botswana is, beforehand, we always only had 3 options for dinner. We always did a red meat, a white meat, and a vegetarian. What we actually have done now is we've introduced a vegetable-focused or a veg-forward dish, which this is basically the main elements of the dish are vegetarian, or vegan, but it then does have a small meat element on it, whether it be sort of a beef jus sauce or vegetables in a duck broth or something like that, just so that there is some sort of a balance. That if you are not wanting to eat fully vegetarian, there is something that you can have a dish that has a lot less protein or a lot less meat on it. And I think one of my favorite dishes at the moment has actually come from that menu. And that would be our roasted Brussels sprouts, which are served with a cauliflower mousse, dukkha, and then a red wine sauce. It's one of those dishes that you actually can't tell that there's no meat on it, or that there's very little meat on it apart from the sauce. That's probably definitely one of my highlights at the moment.
Personally, that's one of my favorites in one dish, so sounds amazing. Oh, wonderful. Murray, great. Well, thank you so much. It's been a really fascinating glimpse sort of behind the scenes into the world of chefs in the Okavango Delta and generally and beyond. So thank you so much.
Well, cheers. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. Thanks again. Thank you for listening to Leave Our World a Better Place. Don't forget to subscribe to make sure that you never miss an episode. If you'd like to find out more about And Beyond, please log on to our website at andbeyond.com.